Warren Beatty's 1990 comic strip adaptation was more than just bright colors and bold villains. It was a production filled with bizarre behind-the-scenes drama, legal battles that lasted decades, and some of Hollywood's strangest creative decisions. From makeup police patrolling the set to prevent spaghetti-eating disasters, to Beatty making surreal TV specials just to keep the rights, to Madonna working for less than minimum wage while flashing Al Pacino during rehearsals, this film is a treasure trove of Hollywood oddities. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about Dick Tracy. Fact 1. The film used only 7 colors. When Warren Beatty set out to bring Dick Tracy to the big screen in 1990, he made a radical creative decision that would define the entire look of the film. He limited the movie's color palette to just 7 specific colors: red, blue, yellow, green, orange, purple, plus black and white. But the restrictions didn't stop there. Beatty insisted that each of these colors had to be the exact same shade throughout the entire production, meaning every red object in the film had to be precisely the same tone of red, every yellow exactly identical, and so on. This wasn't just a stylistic choice for a few scenes or certain costumes. It applied to everything viewers would see on screen: the sets, the props, the costumes, the painted backdrops. Even the cars all had to conform to this strict 7-color rule. Production designer Richard Silbert and his team had to carefully coordinate every visual element to ensure nothing broke the color scheme. If a scene required a chair, that chair could only be one of those 7 approved colors, and it had to match the exact shade used elsewhere in the film. The decision came from Beatty's desire to recreate the look and feel of Chester Gould's original 1930s comic strip, where newspaper printing technology limited the Sunday funnies to these same primary and secondary colors. Beatty wanted audiences to feel like they were watching a living, breathing comic strip come to life, and he believed maintaining this rigid color palette was essential to achieving that effect. Cinematographer Vittorio Storaro, who had won Academy Awards for his work on Apocalypse Now and Reds, said the limited color palette was the most challenging aspect of the entire production, far more difficult than any technical obstacle he'd faced on previous films. The gamble paid off visually, with critics praising the film's unique look, even when they had mixed feelings about other aspects of the movie. The bold, saturated colors jumping off the screen created a visual style unlike anything audiences had seen before, making Dick Tracy instantly recognizable and cementing its place as one of the most visually distinctive comic book adaptations ever made. Fact 2. Special color gels had to be invented. When cinematographer Vittorio Storaro started testing for Dick Tracy in 1990, he ran into a problem that nobody had anticipated. The film's entire visual concept depended on using only 7 pure, saturated colors to recreate the look of a 1930s comic strip. But the lighting gels available at the time simply weren't bold enough to achieve the effect that director Warren Beatty wanted. Storaro found himself stacking multiple layers of existing color gels just to get close to the right saturation. For yellow alone, he had to layer 3 separate yellow gels on top of each other to create the vibrant shade needed for Dick Tracy's iconic trench coat and fedora. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience. The lack of properly saturated gels meant that achieving the film's signature look required extra equipment, more time, and complicated lighting setups that slowed down production. Storaro, who had already won Academy Awards for Apocalypse Now and Reds, knew there had to be a better solution. He reached out to Stan Miller and Jim Meyer at Roscoe, a company that manufactured lighting equipment for the film industry. Storaro explained exactly what he needed and why the existing products weren't working for this unique project. Miller and Meyer went to work creating a completely new palette of pure, highly saturated color filters. After extensive film tests with Storaro to make sure the colors photographed exactly right on camera, they developed custom gels that could finally produce the bold primary colors the film required. These weren't just one-time specialty items made exclusively for Dick Tracy. After the film wrapped, Roscoe recognized that other filmmakers might want access to these intense, saturated colors, so they added them to their standard Senegal product line. They named this new range of filters the Storaro Selection in honor of the legendary cinematographer who had inspired their creation. Today, the Storaro Selection remains available for filmmakers who want to use the same bold comic book style lighting that made Dick Tracy so visually distinctive. Fact 3. Makeup police patrolled the set. The elaborate prosthetics used to transform actors into Dick Tracy's grotesque villains created an unexpected problem on set that required an equally unusual solution. Makeup artists Doug Drexler and John Caglione Jr. realized with horror that certain foods could completely destroy the delicate prosthetic appliances worn by actors like Al Pacino and Dustin Hoffman. Something as simple as eating spaghetti could ruin hours of painstaking makeup work, and since some of the more complex prosthetic applications took several hours to complete each morning, the production couldn't afford to have actors accidentally damage their makeup during lunch breaks. The solution was to hire crew members whose sole job was to follow the heavily made-up actors around and make sure they didn't eat anything that could mess up their prosthetics. These crew members were officially called Makeup Police, or MPs for short, and they became a constant presence on the Dick Tracy set. The Makeup Police had a very specific mission during mealtimes. They would shadow actors who were wearing complex facial prosthetics and monitor what foods they chose from the catering tables. If an actor reached for spaghetti, messy sandwiches, or anything else that required wide mouth movements or could potentially stain or damage the prosthetics, the Makeup Police would step in and redirect them toward safer options. The job required a delicate balance of being firm enough to protect the expensive makeup work while not being so overbearing that it frustrated the performers who were already spending hours each day in the makeup chair. Actor R.G. Armstrong, who played the villain Pruneface, had one of the most intensive makeup applications on the entire production. His entire face had to be covered with alginate, which is the same gelatinous material that dentists use to make tooth impressions. The process took so long that Armstrong told Entertainment Weekly he would actually fall asleep in the makeup chair while the artists worked on him. With that kind of time investment in each application, having Makeup Police monitoring lunch breaks wasn't just a precaution. It was an absolute necessity to keep the production on schedule. Fact 4. Madonna was paid only $35,000. When Madonna signed on to play Breathless Mahoney in Dick Tracy, she was already one of the biggest pop stars on the planet, having dominated the charts throughout the 1980s with hits like a Virgin and Material Girl. By 1990, she could command massive paychecks for virtually any project she chose. Yet for Warren Beatty's comic book adaptation, Madonna agreed to something almost unheard of for a star of her caliber. She worked for scale pay, which meant she received the minimum amount allowed under the Screen Actors Guild contract. Scale pay at that time worked out to approximately $1,440 per week, and Madonna's total paycheck for the entire film came to just $35,000. To put this in perspective, Warren Beatty himself earned $9 million for starring in and directing the film. Plus, he received a percentage of the profits once the movie crossed certain box office thresholds. The pay disparity was staggering, especially considering that Madonna was arguably the bigger draw for younger audiences, and her involvement was crucial to the film's marketing campaign. Madonna pursued the role of Breathless Mahoney aggressively because she wanted it badly enough to take a financial hit. According to reports, she even told the press that Disney didn't come to her asking for help marketing the movie, but rather she saw it as a mutually beneficial opportunity. She knew her massive fan base would give the film visibility that Warren Beatty's name alone couldn't provide, particularly with the younger demographic that studios desperately wanted to attract. While her film salary was minimal, Madonna did make additional money from soundtrack rights for her musical performances in the movie. She released an album called I'm Breathless, which featured songs from and inspired by Dick Tracy, and that became a commercial success. Still, the fact remains that one of the world's most powerful entertainers accepted what amounted to pocket change by Hollywood standards to appear in this film, demonstrating just how much she valued the artistic opportunity over the immediate payday. Fact 5. Dustin Hoffman did it as a favor. When you watch Dick Tracy, you might not even recognize Dustin Hoffman under all the prosthetics and makeup as the character Mumbles. And that's exactly how he wanted it. Hoffman took on this small role purely as a personal favor to his friend Warren Beatty, and the timing of his appearance on set made the whole situation even more remarkable. The actor filmed his memorable interrogation scene on February 13, 1990, which happened to be the day immediately after he won the Academy Award for Best Actor for his performance in Rain Man. Most actors would be celebrating or recovering from the whirlwind of Oscar night, but Hoffman showed up to work in full prosthetics to play a nearly unintelligible gangster. What makes this story even more incredible is that Hoffman was seriously ill when he arrived on set. He was running a fever of 102 degrees, which would normally send most people straight to bed, but he pushed through to honor his commitment to Beatty. The scene he filmed that day is one of the movie's most comedic moments, where Mumbles gives a confession to Dick Tracy under hot lights while sweating profusely. Tracy taunts him with water held just out of reach, and when Mumbles finally speaks, his statement comes out so garbled and high-pitched that it's completely incomprehensible. The scene also features Oscar winner Kathy Bates as the stenographer desperately trying to type out what he's saying, adding to the absurdity. Tracy later reveals he recorded the whole thing in a hidden tape recorder inside a polar bear-shaped water cooler. And when played back at a slower speed, Mumbles' confession clearly incriminated Big Boy Caprice. The role required Hoffman to wear extensive prosthetics, including a bald cap and wig, rubber chin, rubber eyelids, and rubber lips, making it one of the more uncomfortable makeup applications on set, despite not being the most extreme look in the film. Fact 6. Hoffman beat out Gilbert Gottfried. Before Dustin Hoffman signed on to play the incomprehensible henchman Mumbles in Dick Tracy, the role nearly went to a very different kind of performer, comedian Gilbert Gottfried. According to Gottfried's own autobiography, he was seriously considered for the part based solely on his distinctive, grating voice that had become his trademark in the comedy world. The idea was that Gottfried's naturally high-pitched, rapid-fire delivery would be perfect for a character whose dialogue was supposed to be completely unintelligible. Warren Beatty and the casting team apparently thought the comedian's vocal qualities could bring something unique to the gangster who spoke so quickly and unclearly that even other criminals couldn't understand him. However, when Dustin Hoffman expressed interest in the role as a personal favor to his friend Beatty, the Oscar-winning actor immediately got the part instead. Gottfried later reflected on this near miss with his characteristic self-deprecating humor, writing in his memoir that he was genuinely perplexed that both he and Dustin Hoffman would even be considered for the same role. The comedian joked that the only way their names would ever appear together in the same Hollywood conversation would be in the sentence, "I've seen Gilbert Gottfried's acting, and he's no Dustin Hoffman." The quip perfectly captured the absurdity of a legendary dramatic actor and a brash stand-up comedian being in the running for the same part. While Gottfried's distinctive voice might have brought a more comedic energy to Mumbles, Hoffman ultimately created a memorable character by combining physical comedy with prosthetic makeup and his own interpretation of garbled speech. The role required hours in the makeup chair wearing rubber eyelids, lips, and chin, plus a bald cap and wig, something that probably would have been just as uncomfortable for Gottfried as it was for the two-time Academy Award winner. Fact 7. Beatty made bizarre TV specials to keep rights. When Warren Beatty purchased the film and television rights to Dick Tracy from Tribune Media in 1985 for $3 million, he probably didn't imagine he'd still be fighting to keep them decades later. The original agreement required Beatty to periodically produce new Dick Tracy content, or the rights would revert back to Tribune. This unusual clause became the catalyst for one of Hollywood's strangest ongoing sagas. In 2008, after years of legal battles with Tribune over ownership, Beatty needed to prove he was actively using the character. His solution was both creative and completely surreal. He convinced three-time Academy Award-winning cinematographer Emmanuel Lubezki and film critic Leonard Maltin to help him create a 30-minute television special for Turner Classic Movies. The production featured Beatty dressed in Dick Tracy's iconic yellow fedora and trench coat, sitting at a plain wooden table against a black background, being interviewed by Maltin. The bizarre twist was that during the interview, Maltin would ask the fictional Dick Tracy if Warren Beatty planned to make a sequel, and Tracy would respond that he'd heard something about that, but Maltin would have to ask Beatty himself. It was essentially Beatty talking to himself in the third person while in costume. The gambit worked. In 2011, a U.S. District Court judge ruled that Beatty's filming of the television special on November 8, 2008, was sufficient for him to retain the Dick Tracy rights. The court found that Beatty had done everything contractually required of him. Then in February 2023, Beatty did it again. Another special called Dick Tracy Special Tracy Zooms In aired late at night on Turner Classic Movies. This time it featured a Zoom call where Beatty appeared as both Tracy and himself, with Tracy criticizing aspects of the 1990 film to Beatty's face and suggesting a younger actor should take over the role. The specials aired with minimal promotion and were quickly scrubbed from online platforms, making them bizarre oddities that few people actually saw but served their legal purpose perfectly. Fact 8. A 30-year legal battle over rights. Warren Beatty's relationship with Dick Tracy didn't end when the cameras stopped rolling in 1990. In fact, it led to one of Hollywood's strangest and longest-running legal battles over film rights. Back in 1985, Beatty purchased the film and television rights to Dick Tracy from Tribune Media Services for $3 million, with a specific clause that allowed him to retain those rights as long as he continued producing new Dick Tracy content. The agreement included a provision that Tribune could request the rights back, but only after following a 2-year notification process that would give Beatty time to make another film. Things got messy in 2002 when Tribune tried to reclaim the rights, claiming that Beatty hadn't produced any new Dick Tracy material and the rights should revert back to them. However, they allegedly didn't follow the proper notification procedures outlined in the original contract. Disney, which had no interest in making a sequel after the first film's disappointing box office performance, gave most of the rights back to Beatty in May 2005. That same month, Beatty fired back with his own lawsuit against Tribune, seeking $30 million in damages and a declaration that he still owned the rights. His lawyer argued that Tribune was trying to run roughshod over the agreement and had picked the wrong guy to mess with. The legal battle dragged on for years, becoming increasingly bizarre when Tribune filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in March 2009. Tribune's lawyers claimed that Beatty's conduct had effectively locked away the motion picture and television rights to Dick Tracy, preventing anyone from using the character. Beatty's legal team called it a nuisance lawsuit by a bankrupt company. The turning point came in late 2008 when Beatty produced a 30-minute television special for Turner Classic Movies, featuring himself as Dick Tracy, being interviewed by film critic Leonard Maltin. In March 2011, a U.S. District Court judge ruled in Beatty's favor, declaring that his production of the television special was sufficient to retain the Dick Tracy rights. The judge confirmed that Beatty had done everything contractually required of him to keep the character, ending nearly a decade of legal warfare. Fact 9. Al Pacino stayed in character to bully Madonna. When Al Pacino signed on to play the gangster villain Big Boy Caprice in Dick Tracy, he didn't just save his performance for when the cameras were rolling. According to reports from the set, Pacino showed up to rehearsals already in character, and his approach to working with Madonna was anything but gentle. As Big Boy, Pacino would holler at Madonna's character, Breathless Mahoney, mock her, push her around, and taunt her relentlessly during their scenes together. This wasn't an accident or Pacino being difficult. It was a deliberate choice to create authentic tension between their characters that would translate to the screen. Madonna, who was dating director Warren Beatty at the time, found herself dealing with one of Hollywood's most intense actors, treating her like a real gangster would treat a nightclub singer under his control. The physical and verbal intimidation wasn't gentle movie set pretend. It was Pacino fully embodying the menacing crime boss who had just murdered his rival and stolen Breathless away to be his new girlfriend. In the film, Big Boy is supposed to be controlling and threatening toward Breathless, and Pacino made sure that dynamic felt real by never breaking character during their work together. Interestingly, this method approach happened around the same time that composer Stephen Sondheim was also giving Madonna a hard time during the musical portions of the film, creating what must have been a challenging environment for the pop star. However, the results speak for themselves. Madonna's performance as Breathless Mahoney became one of her most critically acclaimed acting roles, and the tension between her character and Pacino's Big Boy crackles with genuine unease throughout the movie. While this kind of method acting approach might seem extreme, it was all part of creating the dark, comic book noir atmosphere that made Dick Tracy so visually and dramatically distinctive. Fact 10. Madonna flashed Pacino. During rehearsals. Working on Dick Tracy brought together two of Hollywood's biggest personalities in Warren Beatty and Madonna, who were dating during production, but it was Madonna's interaction with co-star Al Pacino that created one of the film's most memorable behind-the-scenes moments. According to multiple reports, Madonna flashed Al Pacino during rehearsals for the film, opening her coat to reveal that she was completely naked underneath. This wasn't a scripted moment or part of any scene. It was simply Madonna being Madonna, using her provocative persona to create a memorable moment with her legendary co-star. Pacino, who was playing the over-the-top villain Big Boy Caprice, apparently took the incident in stride and even seemed to appreciate the unexpected surprise. Years later, he joked about the experience in interviews, saying that if anyone ever sees him with a beatific smile on his face in his old age, it will be because he's recalling that particular moment from the Dick Tracy set. The comment reveals just how much of an impression the incident made on the Oscar-winning actor, who has worked with countless Hollywood stars throughout his decades-long career. This kind of bold behavior was very much in character for Madonna at the time, as she was at the height of her blonde ambition era and known for pushing boundaries both on stage and off. The incident also speaks to the unique atmosphere on the Dick Tracy set, where big personalities collided in a production that was already unconventional in many ways. Madonna's playful provocation and Pacino's good-humored response to it demonstrate the kind of chemistry and comfort that developed among the cast during filming, even if their on-screen relationship was far more adversarial. The flash became one of those legendary Hollywood moments that gets passed down through interviews and behind-the-scenes stories, cementing its place in Dick Tracy lore alongside the film's more visible oddities. Fact 11. Sean Young was fired after days of filming. Before Glenn Headley became Tess Trueheart in Dick Tracy, the role belonged to actress Sean Young, who had recently starred in major films like Blade Runner and Wall Street. Young was cast as Dick Tracy's loyal girlfriend and began filming scenes in early 1989. But after just a few days on set, Warren Beatty made the decision to fire her and replace her with Headley. What happened behind the scenes would become one of Hollywood's most disputed casting controversies of the era. According to Sean Young, she lost the role because she refused to respond to sexual advances from Beatty, who was not only starring in the film, but also directing and producing it. Young made these allegations public shortly after her dismissal, claiming that Beatty fired her specifically because she wouldn't sleep with him. Beatty immediately denied these accusations and issued a statement saying he had simply made a mistake in casting her and felt very badly about it. Disney executives offered a different explanation, with studio head Jeffrey Katzenberg telling the Los Angeles Times that Young wasn't perfectly suited for the role, while other reports claimed she was let go officially for not seeming maternal enough in her portrayal of Tess. The controversy deepened when Deborah Roof, the mother of child actor Charlie Korsmo, who played the kid, disputed Young's version of events. Roof stated that the rumor on set was that Young had become too demanding during filming and that the production simply decided not to put up with her behavior. Young maintained her account in later interviews, though she acknowledged in a 2021 interview that Beatty probably thought he was treating her well and that such situations were common across Hollywood at the time. The true reason for Young's firing remains unclear, with each party sticking to their version of events. But the incident marked a turning point in Young's career trajectory and added another layer of behind-the-scenes drama to Dick Tracy's already complicated production history. Fact 12. A theme park ride with Tommy Guns was canceled. Disney was so confident that Dick Tracy would become their next massive franchise that they went all in on plans for an elaborate theme park attraction called Dick Tracy's Crime Stoppers, which was set to be built at multiple locations including Disneyland, Disney MGM Studios in Florida, and even Euro Disney Resort. The ride was designed to be a cutting-edge experience that would anchor entire new themed areas at these parks, complete with 1930s Chicago streets, crumbling brick warehouses, and cobblestone neighborhoods that would transport guests directly into the world of the film. The attraction itself was ambitious and unlike anything Disney had created before. Guests would board vintage 1930s roadsters equipped with the enhanced motion vehicle technology that would later be used for the Indiana Jones adventure and dinosaur attractions. But here's where things get really interesting. Each car would have been outfitted with toy Tommy guns that passengers could use to shoot at gangster targets throughout the ride. The technology was similar to what eventually became Buzz Lightyear's Space Ranger spin, where hitting certain targets would trigger movements and sound effects. Shoot a trash can and it would rattle, blast a window, and you'd hear glass shattering, making every ride-through unique and interactive. Disney released an official press statement in 1990 describing how guests would join America's favorite comic strip detective in a high-speed chase through Chicago, using the latest in audio animatronics, simulation technology, and special effects. The queue would wind through interconnected warehouses filled with wooden crates under massive trussed ceilings, with glimpses of iconic scenes from the movie, including the infamous bath scene where the character Lips Manless met his end. However, the film's disappointing box office performance killed these plans completely. Dick Tracy barely cracked the top 10 highest-grossing films of 1990, and after Disney spent nearly $100 million on production and marketing, the studio estimated they lost tens of millions during the North American release. Without sequels on the horizon and no merchandise flying off shelves, Disney quietly canceled Crime Stoppers along with the planned Chicago-themed lands, leaving only brief stage shows and character meet-and-greets that were quickly shuttered by fall of 1990. Fact 13. Oscar winner Kathy Bates played a stenographer. One of the most entertaining scenes in Dick Tracy features Dustin Hoffman's character Mumbles, giving a completely incomprehensible confession to the police, and if you look closely at the stenographer desperately trying to transcribe his garbled speech, you'll recognize a familiar face. That's Academy Award winner Kathy Bates sitting behind the typewriter, looking increasingly frustrated as she attempts to make sense of the villain's rapid-fire nonsense. Bates appears in what amounts to a brief cameo role, but her presence adds an extra layer of comedy to an already hilarious sequence. In the scene, Dick Tracy interrogates Mumbles under hot lights, and when the criminal finally breaks down and starts talking, his words come out so fast and distorted that they're completely unintelligible. Bates' character sits at her typewriter, her confused expression perfectly capturing the absurdity of trying to create an official police record from what sounds like pure gibberish. The joke pays off when Tracy reveals he's been secretly recording mumbles the entire time and plays back the confession at a slower speed, making the incriminating words finally understandable. What makes this cameo particularly notable is the timing. Bates had recently won the Academy Award for Best Actress for her terrifying performance as Annie Wilkes in Misery, which came out the same year as Dick Tracy in 1990. Warren Beatty had actually considered both starring in and directing Misery himself before ultimately choosing to make Dick Tracy instead, so seeing Bates pop up in his film creates an interesting connection between the two projects. The role might be small and mostly silent, but it's a perfect example of how Dick Tracy was absolutely packed with talented actors in even the tiniest parts, turning what could have been a throwaway moment into something memorable thanks to Bates's expert comedic timing and expressive reactions to the chaos unfolding in front of her. Fact 14. The kid ate ice cream 50 times. Warren Beatty's reputation as a perfectionist director reached almost comical extremes during the filming of Dick Tracy, and 10-year-old Charlie Korsmo experienced this firsthand in what became one of the most grueling scenes of his young acting career. In a seemingly simple scene where his character, known only as the Kid, enjoys a cup of chocolate ice cream, Korsmo found himself eating the same frozen treat over and over again as Beatty called for take after take after take. By the time the director was finally satisfied, the young actor had consumed chocolate ice cream approximately 50 times in a single day, creating what Korsmo himself later described as a brutal experience that required the use of a spit bucket between takes to prevent him from getting sick. Korsmo recalled years later that it wasn't always clear what Beatty was looking for with each new take, noting that the director didn't really tell anyone what he was thinking and just kept filming until it felt right to him, regardless of how long that took. The child actor had the time and the production had the resources to keep going, so they did. What made the situation even more surreal was that Beatty apparently felt a strange kinship with the young actor's ice cream ordeal. The director told Korsmo that he himself had filmed an Eskimo pie eating scene in his 1967 film Bonnie and Clyde that required 60 takes, and that particular marathon filming session had been so intense that Beatty ended up in the hospital afterward. Whether this anecdote was meant to comfort the young actor or simply acknowledge the absurdity of the situation remains unclear, but it certainly highlighted Beatty's unwavering commitment to getting exactly what he wanted on film, no matter how many times it took or how much ice cream had to be consumed in the process. Fact 15. Beatty initially wanted prosthetics for himself. When Warren Beatty first started developing Dick Tracy in the late 1980s, he had an ambitious vision that included transforming himself into the square-jawed detective using prosthetic makeup. In the original comic strip created by Chester Gould, Dick Tracy had an extremely distinctive appearance with an exaggerated lantern-like jaw and angular features that made him instantly recognizable. Beatty, wanting to stay as faithful as possible to the source material, initially planned to use the same prosthetic techniques on himself that would later transform his co-stars into grotesque villains. The makeup team actually went ahead and fitted Beatty with a false nose and jaw, designed to replicate Tracy's comic strip appearance. According to reports from the production, these early prosthetic tests were meant to give Beatty that iconic square-jawed look that defined the character for decades. However, after seeing the results and considering how it would work on screen, Beatty made a crucial decision to abandon the prosthetics for his own character entirely. The reasoning behind this choice was ultimately practical and creative. Beatty realized that covering his own face with prosthetics would distract audiences from the film itself and potentially pull them out of the story. Unlike the villains, whose grotesque appearances were essential to their characters and meant to be shocking and memorable, Tracy himself needed to be the grounded center of this wild, colorful world. Having the lead actor and director of the film hidden behind layers of makeup would have shifted the focus in the wrong direction. Instead, Beatty decided to reserve the elaborate prosthetic work exclusively for the villains and supporting characters. This created a clear visual distinction in the film, where Tracy and the other sympathetic characters like Tess Trueheart and Breathless Mahoney maintained more natural appearances, while the criminal underworld was populated by visually distorted, nightmare-inducing faces. The decision proved to be the right one, as the film's makeup work went on to win the Academy Award for Best Makeup, with the villains' transformations becoming one of the most memorable aspects of the entire production.